Hello and welcome everybody. My name is Ben Munson and I'm glad you're joining us for our fourth webinar in our series. Today we're covering FarmQA map layers, how to convert field data into useful knowledge. So we'll start out with just a really quick overview and recap, and then we will jump into covering the content for today, which really focuses in on how to handle spatial data sets within FarmQA. So with that said, a little bit of background. My name is Ben Munson. I'm with FarmQA as a senior technology specialist. We've been around since 2015, and we focused on our tool set that you can see here, which is the crop scouting functionality, the recommendation writing. We're getting into the data layer imports, which you can see is that third tier in the pyramid. And that's what we'll be focusing in on today, which is it's a relatively newer feature to our product set. But then you can see going down the pyramid lower here where we're going in the future with additional integrations, and then focusing in on our analytics and insights functionality. Okay, so with that said, we're going to focus in on map layers. This is how we handle spatial data sets in FarmQA, both from an import perspective. We can manipulate those spatial files as far as the style goes within FarmQA, but then the real value comes into play when you are viewing those on a mobile application to direct either scouting, soil sampling, any sort of in-field activity. You can pull up these mobile layers on a phone, on a tablet, and direct yourself or view for reference when you're physically in a field. So we're going to jump right in and make good use of our time. So we are jumping over into our product, and we are starting in controller. So this is our web platform. And you can see further details on basic functionality of the web platform in previous webinars, but we're going to hone in on our spatial data set functionality here, which we call map layers. So we're looking at a set of fields in this case, which have been imported as shapefiles. But what I've done in this case is I've uploaded a map layer file. So if I click on this field F30, we see a section within our field detail pane on the left-hand side, which is called layers. And in my case, I've got a layer called yield map, which I can toggle on. I can see the details of that spatial layer, along with a legend that we've uploaded in this case. And so in this demo, I will walk through how we can create these layers, upload them, manipulate them, and the different types of layers that we can bring in. So this is just an example, but we're going to dig in deeper into how this gets created. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to go into the settings of the platform. And within here, we have a tab called Map Layers. And what I'm doing within this interface is I'm going to set up the category of layer that I'm going to want to import or ingest. So you can see on the left-hand column here, I have different layer types, something like EC data, imagery, NDVI, sampling points, zone maps, etc. So these are the different file types that we could bring in, the categories, but then the file types that we then accept on the import would be things like shape files. So that would contain your .shp, SHX, DBF, etc. Then we also take KMLs and any GeoTIFFs as well as accepted file formats. But to create, for example, a new category of layer, we could say we're going to maybe deal with an organic matter layer. Within this, we give the layer type a name. We can give it a description. So if you want to say the source, to say from Veris EC sled. And then within here, we give this a layer type. Now, as I bring this drop down, you see we have a permanent layer, growing season, and time-based layers. What that means within FarmQA is a permanent layer would be something like a soil type map, something that's not going to change season to season. Growing season is, as it sounds, it's going to be a layer specific to a year. So that could be something like my yield map, which I just showed. And then the last category would be time-based. What time-based is would be if you have multiple images or files that would pertain to a single growing season. And a really good example of time-based would be something like imagery. The interface is slightly different with time-based layers in the sense that you get a slider to view data over time, opposed to a single image per growing season, or the permanent layers as well. So in my case, the organic matter layer is going to be, in this case, it's going to be a growing season layer. The last thing to point out in this view would be we do have global layers. I'm going to circle back to this towards the end of the presentation, but what this would be is this is a toggle on or off, and if we choose to have a global layer, this would be something that you could upload that goes beyond or extends beyond individual fields. So things like I'm going to be showing an annual precipitation map for an entire state or region. So that would be a toggle that we'll return to and explain in a little more detail. At this point, if I save this layer, you're going to see how that creates a new category. So now if I want to go upload maps, I can select and choose from any one of these categories. And what I'm going to do next is I'm going to create and actually upload a zone map, and then we'll also show you how to bring in that organic map layer as well. So to do that, we need to first find the field that corresponds to the file that we are looking to upload. So what I'm going to do here, and I'm going to pull up my File Explorer so you guys can see exactly what I'm doing. But I've pulled up this field F30, and I'm going to click on the boundary, which pulls the field detail pane out from the left. And where you saw me toggle on the yield maps, instead of viewing that layer, I'm going to add a new layer. And we get the interface where we can pick from our categories of layer types. And as you recall, I'm going to start by uploading a zone map. So once I've created that category, this is where you have a drop zone to bring in a file, or I could click, which would bring me into a view within my file structure where I could locate the image or the files I wanted to bring in. So you can see from my view, these are several files that I'm going to be showing you throughout the course of this webinar. But I'm going to start with this GV zone. And what this is a zone map. And when I simply drag and drop it into the drop zone within FarmQA, you can see that gives me a flag saying the image was uploaded successfully. And you'll notice that the layers automatically delineate and actually style within FarmQA. The reason that was done in this particular case is this file that I just uploaded is from ADMS or GK, and it contains their styling file format. So if I expand this out, you can see that this contains a .gkt_VAF, which is their unique styling format. We recognize that, and we will color the zones to match the way it looked in that program. So this is a very streamlined, simplistic way of handling map layers. We'll also talk through a scenario where you can style it on your own. But you can see once I've clicked the edit of that layer, all the styling has been done automatically based on that file. The other thing to note from this view that I'll show right now that I wanted to use in this particular example is the show labels. So in my case, I'm simply going to turn on the labels, and then I get the opportunity to choose which attribute I want to use as the label ID. So I'm going to choose zones, click save, and now you're going to see that this layer will update. But in addition, it's going to show my zone numbers on top of that file. So again, that was just one example how I created the category, uploaded the file, and the styling was automatically done for me in this case. The other thing to note from this view that we can do is if I bring up the legend, you'll notice that I don't have any legend specific to this file. But what I can do is I can create a legend or upload a legend that associates to this particular zone map. So instead of editing the polygon, I'm going to choose to edit the legend. Right now, this file is set up to use a default, which there is no default. So I'm going to check that off, turn that off, and now I get a drop down to say the default was none, but I'm going to do a custom legend instead. Now I want this to match what I'm displaying on my map. So what this is I'm choosing my color ramp for the legend, and I'm going to run it red to green just like you see in the map behind you. Now as far as the scale goes, this is a 7 zone map, so I'm going to set my range from 0 to 7, and I'm going to click save. Now what you see is there's a new option in our legend of the map showing, the zone coloration 0 to 7, so we can better understand the coloration in this example. The other layer option, or sorry, legend option that we have is if I do click on this F30, and I'm going to return to this, the yield map rather. And this was a yield map that was brought in, but in this case, it contained a PNG for a legend. So you can see the color scale that's going to correspond to that, that map that we're seeing right now. So in that case, on the layer edit options, you would have the ability to upload a PNG instead of just the custom. So in this case, we're using an image, and you can see that that was the image that we're showing right now. Moving on, I'll talk through an example where the styling is not done for us already through that GKT filing or styling option. So what I'll do is I'm going to jump to a demo field where I can upload different data set. So this is a field where I'm going to select this EC2, and again, I'm going to come into my map pane and add a layer. From this view, I'm going to select, in my case, the organic matter layer that I created as part of this demo. And within my file, you can see that I have organic matter as a file type here within my file structure, and I'm just going to drag and drop that into FarmQA. Now, this is an example I wanted to show where you can see after I dropped that in, the styling was not done for me, and that's because there was no logic in that file structure for how we were supposed to handle this, how we were supposed to color these zones. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to edit this layer, and now when we're in this polygon edit view, we have a couple different options. The first, again, is to show labels, and I'm going to leave that for now. I'm going to worry about the styling first. So for the style, I have an option to use a single color, and that's actually what's being used now. As you can see, it's a single color and it's red. But instead, what I'd rather do is I can either color based on an attribute. So if this is a file that contained an attribute that actually called out the color of each zone, let's say zone 1 was called red, zone 2 was called blue, etc., we would color it based on that attribute. The third and likely the most common use case here is actually the custom. Once I select custom, we get additional options that show up in our window. And this is going to allow us to select our color ramp in this, well, sorry, one step back, select our attribute. So in my case, there is only one attribute in this file. It makes it easy, but you could select which attribute you wanted to use if it was a file that contained multiple. I can then choose my color ramp. So in this case, if I want to run this red to red, greens, blues, etc. But in this case, I do want to run red to green. Now, down below, we have two additional options. We can invert the scale, meaning that the low end of this range is going to be green and the upper range is red. In my case, that's not logical, so I'm going to keep this the way it is, but note that that is available. And then the automatic range, we are identifying the lowest number in that data set and the highest number and automatically assigning that range. Now, you could turn this off and then you could key in the range values that you might be interested in. In my case, I do want to keep this at this relative scale. So I can save this. I can also save this as a default. What that default will do is if I then upload organic matter files to other fields, it's going to use the same color ramp, the same scale, and that will then do the styling automatically for those future files and keep the styling identical between the fields. In my case, I'm only going to show you this one field with the organic matter file, but you can see what that looks like. In my case, I like how that looks, so I'm going to keep it, but I am going to turn on the labels as well so we can see what those values were, and you can see that here projected on the map. Okay, so that is an example of how we brought in a file that did not have styling, and we did the styling within FarmQA. One thing to note is that within this view, instead of editing the style of just this organic matter layer, we could edit the style of all the organic matter files that are brought in. So in this case, we can choose to always have the same legend, things like that, and the styling would go for the polygon styling as well, as far as the defaults. Okay, I'd like to shift over and we can now talk through the use case of these layers on a mobile application. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump over and I'm simulating our scouting application in a web browser. So this would be running on an Android, an iOS, a tablet, whatever you prefer to use in the field. And what we're viewing here is the field, this F30, which I brought the zone map into. But what I'm going to point out before showing these layers is within the mobile application, we're going to want to click into the settings tab. Within here, I'm going to sync now just to pull in all those new layers that I created as part of this webinar. But what I want to draw your attention to is this layer sync preferences. So if I click on this, this is the interface that we have on our mobile application where you as a user can choose what layers are being pulled down, for what time period, and then for what organizational unit within your account. So what that really means to us is, well, first of all, if we come from the top down, you can choose to only download or pull down images when you're in Wi-Fi. By default, this is off, so we will be pulling down new images with every sync period. We also have a days to sync, so this is more pertinent to something like imagery. We have an integration to Planet currently, and if you have daily imagery, what this 30 days is telling you is that we're only going to be pulling in the last 30 days of imagery. However, you could key this to whatever you want it to be, say 60 days instead. And then we're going to be pulling back the data set going back further than that 30 days. So that's what you're seeing in the days to sync. If we look below here, these are the same categories of layers that I had delineated within the web platform. And at any given time, we could choose what data layers we wanted to see within the mobile application. So I'll turn on that organic matter layer. And then below, what I was talking about is within your account, at a given time, you could choose to just pull in layers for one of your growers, one of your branches, one of your agronomists, etc. That way, the mobile application is pulling less data at any given point in time if you just want to work with a certain branch of your organization. Right now, I'm choosing to pull everything. So this is from the top down, and then these are all the layers I'm pulling. Once I back out, you'll notice that that automatically initiates a sync. So that is pulling down the layers, or any new layers, I should say, that would have changed in those preferences that I just set. Okay, so now moving on to visualization. I've located this field already on this F30. This is the field I want to be showing. But what you'll see here is I've already got my zone map turned on. But what I'm going to do here is you can slide up from the bottom or click on what we call this drawer handle. So this allows you to view the different layers that are available for this field. I've got the yield map on, but I can also alternately toggle to the zone map. You can see how quickly that loaded, but this would allow you to then be physically present in this field. Our mobile application shows your location with a green GPS dot. So you could walk throughout this zone map if you were scouting, if you were soil sampling, etc., and you'd know exactly what zone you were in at any given time. In addition, there's significant use cases for the map layer function. If you want to bring in soil sampling points, you could be navigating point to point. You could be using this for in-season imagery if you're looking at, let's say, stock rot late season or trying to make harvest decisions, etc. So this is really where the value does come in. And then as far as our scouting functionality, if you do want to scout maybe the zone number 1, that's where you can click or drop a pin where you're standing, add an observation point, etc., and then that will correspond back to that zone. Are interested in our scouting functionality, we do have those previous webinars that you can reference there. So that's the mobile view that I would show. Additionally, we do have the ability to view legends. So if I bring up that yield map, for example, you can see that this was the uploaded PNG that you saw previously. You can see that color range running corresponding back to this image. And so that is available on the mobile app as well. All right, previously I mentioned global map layers and what that means to us. And so I'm going to walk through an example with you that is going to handle that use case. So again, if I come back into settings, we're going to look at map layers. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to add a new layer type. But in this case, it's going to be annual rainfall. And I'm going to run this as a growing season layer, as I have precipitation data year by year. But in this case, I am going to turn this on as a global layer. And as I save this, this will now create that as a new category of layer that I can upload. Now when I go to the map, instead of clicking on a field for these global layers, what I'm going to do is I'm going to slide out. Let me go back into my North Dakota region here. There we go. I'm going to slide out my map details from the left. So right where my mouse is here, these are all the map specific pane where I can interact with the map, turn on layers, color my fields by different attributes, etc. But what you see down at the very bottom is global map layers. And I have the annual rainfall map is now an option, and I can edit this. Now within this interface, this brings us back to a similar interface where we can drag and drop that file. And if I pull up my layers again, these files towards the top, I'm going to bring in a file that's going to correspond back to given years. One thing that I did forget to do here is I'm going to grab the correct season. So if I want to go back and bring in the 2020 growing season, I'm going to toggle to that year, and then I'm going to drag and drop this 2020 year into my drop zone. Now this is a much larger file, so it does take a little bit more to process, but you can see that now we will still get that flag, that banner at the top, telling us when those layers are in. I am going to bring in a second layer here, so if I go to 19, I can also drop in that file, just so you guys can see what that looks like within our interface here for multiple years worth of data. So you can see on the left-hand side, we have the 2020 and the 2019 files uploaded. What I'll do in this case is I'm going to toggle on that rainfall map now, just with this checkbox. And this is very dense data, as you can see. So we have data squared out across the entire state. But now if I want to style this, so right now this came in with zero styling. But that's where I can come into this interface that we had discussed before. And in my case, I'm going to use the styling option again of custom. I do want to stick with that color ramp of running it red to yellow, or sorry, red to green. And then in this case, again, I only have a single attribute, so I'm going to just use that value, which in this case is an annual precip value for the year of 2020. So once I have selected that, you can see my range down here is the min and max of that file. This is one use case where I might want to override this and say, I want to run this 5 inches to 30 inches of precipitation total. The reason I might want to do that is I want to compare apples to apples year over year. So if I ran a dynamic range, if you will, or a relative scale, you would see greater differences within the year, but then you wouldn't be looking at the same scale between 19 and 20 and etc. So I'm going to do that, but I'm going to save this file. And now what we'll see is if I back out and we're going to view this from the map pane, but now what we get is the coloration across the entire state. If I go to the correct year here, we'll see the coloration across the state that will represent the precipitation values. And within these map layers, you can see this is a concept of this file is going beyond my field boundaries, but I could still zoom in and see how much precipitation we got regionally. One thing to note with any of our map layers is that you can click on these individual cells in this case and see the precipitation values corresponding to the individual zones or regions. The other thing to note here is if we do want to, we'll do this year over year comparison. So I will style 19 as well. And I will do the same thing we did before with the color range. And what I'm going to do again is we're making sure we're comparing apples to apples. So I'm going to run this 5 to 30 inches. And then again, this is where this is a good use case for styling as default, as that way we wouldn't need to individually style each of the years. It would happen automatically on the upload of the files to the additional years like 18, 17, etc. if we want to work our way backwards. So what we're going to show now is, keep in mind we're still in the year 2020, but when this loads, you'll see this is the precipitation data for 2020. But now the convenience here is I can just use my growing season toggle if I want to be viewing 19 versus 20. And there is, load time with the density of the data, but you can see that this is a much wetter year in 2019. And again, we could pull up and generate those legends if we wanted that for a reference when reviewing a data set like this, where we could run that same color ramp and create that custom legend, which was 0 to 30. And now if we display that, we'll get a better reference within this legend if you're just visually looking at this and trying to understand how much precipitation fell throughout the state. So within this, again, we could click on those values and see the corresponding data. So that is the global map layer. You could also work to view this on the mobile application if you want to pull this up regionally. Another use case for this could be more a regional soil type map. If you have, let's say you're growing across a couple different quarters, things like that, you could upload regional soil layer maps. Going back into different use cases, so we talked about zone maps, yield maps. We also do support imagery. So that's one of the direct integrations we have. Is I'm jumping over here and we're showcasing, this is an integration we have with Planet Labs, but it does showcase the time-based layer. So if as I slide across this growing season, we're in, this is actually 21, but as I slide throughout here, you can see the different dates that I had an image come through. And now this field 61, you're seeing that image change date to date that we have in the system. So imagery would be another example. And then a few things just to round this webinar out would be if you do have something like a soil sample or a zone or grid sampling situation, you can see what that would look like. In this case, if I were to turn on these sampling points, you could see where those points were delineated and where to sample in that field as well. So the list of use cases would really go on and on here, but the concept again is any spatial data that you have is a shapefile, KML, GeoTIFF, etc. We could upload that, display it first of all in our web portal, but then in addition on the mobile application, which you can then use to direct any of your in-field operations. So with that, I want to leave just a few minutes in this half-hour webinar for questions, if there are any. But otherwise, we are available for questions via info@farmqa.com. We'd love it if you'd watch our previous webinars on our basic functionality, but then also we do have some upcoming webinars as well. And I will pull that slide up while we're waiting for questions. Actually, here's the interface on how you could ask questions within Teams. There's the chat box, and then down here as well. I will leave this up for our upcoming webinars as well for anybody that would like to join us. Next week, we're talking about analytics, and that is the way we're rolling up data across all of our sources within FarmQA and allowing you to make easier decisions in season or more in a planning phase. The last webinar on the 9th, we're going to cover a lot of the significant features, but they're smaller features that we can group into one webinar and cover a lot of different things like our corn yield estimator and a navigation feature within the application. So I'll turn my eyes over to the questions, but thank you for joining if there are none. We really appreciate your time, and we'd love to hear from you if you have any feedback or questions. Thank you.